Time you are live. Thanks for joining. Gandhi is just restarting his computer and will be with us shortly. So you've just got me for the soft start today. Usually good to give people a bit of time to join. Anyway, for those people just joining, Gandhi's just restarting his computer, having some issues. Hopefully he's going to be able to join us. We just had some fun planning a good session covering a number of topics. Top of the bill is Wes Streeting's letter today to the profession, not to the BMA as he normally does. And that story around the BMA losing its exclusive negotiating role in the GP contracts going forwards, or particularly into the 2026 contract negotiations. We'll also be having a look at budget 25 and discussing what that might mean for general practice and giving our reactions, and also signposting to a few other sources that that probably cover the budget much better than we do. But we've got our takes on it, so we are going to give you some information. Here he is.
Sorry, everyone. Apologies on that. It's been, weird. Don't know. Just decided it didn't want to work.
Oh no. Oh well, looking very fashionable there. Back to the future hoodie, looking very good.
Well, it's a little bit nippy in Nottingham today, so I had to bust out the hoodie.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well, I'm pretty toasty in my top up here in the attic, although it is a little bit drafty. So yeah, I was just telling people that you're on your way, doing a soft start, just talking through what we're covering today. I'd mentioned letter from Wes to the profession rather than the BMA, which is his usual kind of letters destination that we'll be talking about. The big story, I think, which is that the BMA have lost their exclusive negotiating role for the GP contract going forwards, or particularly into the contract negotiations for the 26 April contract, that we will be giving our take on the budget. We'll show people some other places they can get probably better information about how the budget will impact general practice. But we have takes, so we will give those. And we'll also be looking at the Doctors Association UK and their Your GP Here For You campaign, which is sort of there really to influence the contract negotiations, I think, and has quite a different kind of approach and flavour to the BMA. So should be an interesting episode.
Definitely. So I think we've probably been going long enough, and we're probably all right to get started, aren't we, Andy?
I think so. We've got you here now, so let's go.
Okay. All right, let's give it a go then, shall we? There's been lots of changes in general practice, including tension that seems to be driving even more so between the government and the BMA, to the point where the BMA may be out of contract negotiations and somebody else possibly even moving into them. And in addition to that, we've also got the budget as well. So we're going to cover all that in today's episode, as ever, as we continue to tech enhance your primary care and learning. Let's get cracking, shall we? Welcome, GP learners, to this episode where myself and Andy are covering a variety of news stories hitting general practice, including the budget. We're going to get to that a little bit later on, but how are we doing there, Andy?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, really looking forward to discussing the topics today, I guess, just to give people what those topics are. BMA lose exclusive negotiating role in the GP contract. That's top of the bill. Letter from Wes dated today to the profession. Our takes on budget 25, and Doctors Association UK have sort of given their position on the contract for 2026 with their Your GP Here For You campaign. So that's, I think, what we'll be covering. And anything else that people raise online with us, we'll be able to react to.
Absolutely. So if you do want to mention anything, do feel free to comment in whichever platform you're joining us from. We're also going live both landscape and portrait in different places as well now, so we've got some new fancy tech that allows us to do that, although I think the Instagram one's broken, so we'll figure that out later. But hopefully you're going to have a really interesting time as we look at some of this content, and we're getting started, aren't we, Andy, with this big question as to whether or not the BMA is out or not. So do you want to start us off on this one, Andy?
Yeah, so as ever, we've picked this up from Pulse and kind of doing the rounds on social media, really. So this is sort of pictures of Pulse exclusive. So I think actually the first kind of hint that we got of this, or how it dropped, was with a piece penned by Amanda Doyle, who's National Director for Primary Care with NHS England, that she did on the 25th in Pulse, where she actually gives quite a long piece about relations between sort of Department of Health and general practice, and largely talks about the 1st of October access changes. And it's largely about that. And then really right towards the end, she says, we will consult the GPC as we usually. So I am determined to keep listening to your concerns and to work to address them as consultation for the 26-27 GMS contract begins in the coming weeks. We will consult with GPCE as we usually do, but also talk to a range of other groups so that we hear from a wider group of primary care stakeholders, including patients. So, so there's that statement at the bottom there. Pulse has then sort of jumped on that and got some more information, you know, that those other groups that will also be consulted about the contract in addition to BMA GPC will be the RCGP, will be the National Association of Primary Care, Health Watch England, National Voices, and also NHS Confederation. So quite a range. And the article further goes on to say that sort of each stakeholder will get one consultation sort of episode, you know, one consultation, I don't know what you would call them, talks, chats, consultations, as they prepare for the contract, and also kind of acknowledging that I think they are contractually obliged to meet once with the BMA in terms of negotiating that contract. This article gets a range of responses from the other organizations that have been asked to participate, and widely those organizations have said that they're happy to be listened to by the government, with the exception of the RCGP, who I believe have said that they will put forwards the position of the profession, but they're being clear that it's not their role to negotiate the contract. So that's sort of the position of the RCGP, with other organisations, I think, largely saying, yes, you know, we're happy to be heard within the consultation. So that's really, I think, the story as far as we know. There's also the letter for Wes. So when we're ready, we can dive into that, because that's really, really interesting, the letter from Wes Streeting that's come out today. But what are your kind of initial thoughts, reactions, comments? There might be things within the story, Gandhi, that you want to kind of zero in on that I've not covered.
Well, I think when this dropped, there was a lot of concern going around various different places, you know, groups, channels, etc., and all that kind of stuff, in terms of, well, hold on a second, what the hell's happening here? So, you know, since when does a political party who's traditionally rooted with unions basically saying it's going to exclude the lead union for general practice potentially out of contract negotiations, or minimize their role within that? I mean, you know, this is an interesting point. Can you imagine if this happened with, for example, the rail unions and what's his name, Mike, whatever his name is, the lead negotiator, Lynch? Yeah.
No. Mike Lynch is a tech entrepreneur who died on a yacht, I think. Oh gosh. Anyway,
I forgot his name, but I can picture the face. But yeah, imagine if they were told, imagine if the railway union were told, Transport Rail Union were told that they're no longer going to be the lead consultant on the contract for RMT, and you know, that would not go down well with, I guess, Labour, as well as, you know, the union itself. So it is a bit weird. I'm slightly curious as to how that works logistically in terms of, you know, consulting with these different parties, noting the fact that they're consulted anyway, I believe, to some degree. And the reason why I mention that is I know that Katie herself, Katie Bramwell-Stainer, the head of the GPC, has put out a video stating that, you know, they're normally consulted anyway. It's just a bit weird that, you know, the emphasis is being put onto this. But there is a bit more emphasis, which Andy's bringing up, which is this letter from Streeting to the profession, and it seems to be getting a bit more warlike between the both of them, isn't it?
Well, this is interesting. So we've been following over the last few weeks and months, like the letter exchanges between Department of Health, and it's mainly Stephen Kinnock, the Minister for General Practice, and Wes Streeting, Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, who write letters to Dear Katie at the GPC, and Katie writes letters to them saying, you know, Dear Wes and Dear Stephen, and they're on first name terms, but quite quite passive aggressive letters, making accusations of each other that they're sort of being misleading, and particularly really focused around this issue of the 1st of October changes to GP access arrangements and the opening of online consultations throughout all of core hours. And there's been a sticking point about what the GPC knew and when, and what they approved prior to the contract being agreed. But this is a bit different, because it says "Dear colleagues," which was the first thing that struck me, and I thought, this is interesting. There's perhaps an attempt to reach around the BMA and the GPC and address the profession directly. The first bit of this letter is quite sort of complimentary of things that GPs are doing. So thanks for all your help, noting that patient satisfaction on GP survey and ONS data is up. This is a significant achievement. Talks about how GPs, he's aware, are at the forefront of developing of neighbourhood health, and that he's kind of participated in and seen that happening. He talks about Labour's, picks some points of Labour's record so far in supporting the NHS in general practice, talking with these bullet points here about the 8.9% cash uplift at the contract last year, that they were asked to include GPs in the RS scheme, and that they did that, and that cost £82 million, and ensuring that advice and guidance was kind of, that work was acknowledged with, £20 million for that scheme. So then he changes his tone and says, amidst this brilliant work, you will be aware that the BMA GPC has launched a formal dispute with the government over the 1st of October online access contract changes, which they agreed to, and which the vast majority of practices have now adopted. And then towards the end, so it's interesting, and towards the end, well, actually, no, later he goes on to accuse KBS, Katie Bramall-Stainer, chair of the GPC, of unprofessional behaviour regarding the content of a speech that she gave to England LMC conferences, and makes some, lifts some words from that, and accuses them of being unprofessional. And then closes with, I sincerely hope the BMA GPC will choose to de-escalate their dispute. And then there's this statement about the other stakeholders, says, I will shortly be writing to the BMA GPC and a range of general practice stakeholders to begin consultation for the 26-27 GMS contract, ensuring we reflect the diversity of views amongst the profession and patients as we establish our next steps to get general practice back on its feet and make it fit for the future. So just sort of interesting. I mean, I've got a few takes on the letter, Gandhi. I don't know what your kind of thoughts and reactions are to it.
I mean, it's a fairly interesting letter in the sense of, like you say, first it paints a really positive picture of general practice, and then it's taking a clear swipe at the changes in terms of the relationship that's been evident over the past few months between the GPC and the Secretary of State. I think, again, going back to that point of consulting with other people about the GP contract is a bit weird, because it's asking other people to tell GPs how to work, which to me is a bit of a frustration, because they're not being asked to deliver that workload. It's the GP partnerships. Now, does that then mean that we are then looking at what mentions in there in terms of reform of the contract? And there's this whole question, obviously, about the neighbourhood contracts and various other things that many practices are concerned about in terms of how this will work, in the background of some of the other changes that we're going to be talking about later on in this episode. But also, where does that land in terms of patient care? Where does that land in terms of stability? Where does that land in terms of the fact we were told there was not going to be big reforms, and yet there's massive reforms coming through? You know, it's just, yeah, really chaotic in my mind.
It is chaotic. It's quite disheartening. And so my kind of take on this, I like to try and sort of think, what's really going on here? So I think, so it's interesting. This is dear colleagues, not dear BMA GPC.
Different tone, very much so.
I think so. Different audience. Well, it's all been performative, in terms of the other letters. That's why they're open letters and not private letters. But I think there's perhaps an attempt to perhaps drive a wedge between colleagues. Being very complimentary representative of GPs in general practice, but actually really going for the BMA and the GPC within the letter. So I think there's perhaps an attempt to drive a wedge maybe between the profession and the GPC, perhaps look for regime change at the BMA GPC and sort of promote that. It's interesting. I wonder if saying that they're broadening the consultation is perhaps an additional threat to the BMA, because there's a long way until the contract, and actually they could do more after this to clarify the roles of the different stakeholders, and they could say, actually, well, you know, the BMA is the main, you know, contract, you know, people that were consulting on the contract, you know, but we're consulting with the others, as actually we often do, and we listen to them, you know, to get context. So they could actually, the government could row back from this if the BMA give them what they want. So I think there's perhaps a little bit of a game being played within it to soften up the BMA and the GPC. I don't know. I'm probably wrong. I'm probably reading too much into it, but I do wonder if that's what we're witnessing here. But it's really disheartening, and the general practice contract is really important. Lots of people work in the sector, and you know, it's the part of the NHS that patients have the most contact with. So it's a shame to see it being kind of negotiated or.
And a reminder on that point, it's the only part of the system which doesn't have a deficit. It's the only part of the system that consistently increases the amount of patients it's seeing month on month, year on year. So, you know, the fact that we're seeing a tone that is completely different to, I think, the way Wes approached things this time last year is an interesting turn of events. And it does make you wonder if there are other motives behind this. And does that mean we're going to see changes come through? And the one that everyone is looking anxiously to see is this neighbourhood plan contract that's coming through, due to be in November, we were told. Obviously, we're coming up to the end of November in 3 days.
Neighbour guidance is coming.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. You never know, Andy. We've always had this thing that whenever I go away, the massive things drop. So next week it might come out.
It'll probably happen. Might be going solo with that. Oh gosh.
I'm afraid you will definitely have to go solo on that one, because I will not be around next week, I'm afraid. So EGP, just on that point, I will be away next week, taking a break with the family to sort some things out and stuff. So if it does happen to drop, either it'll be the following week or Andy may go solo if it's that momentous. We'll see.
So, but really interested to hear if people have any opinions about the kind of dispute between BMA GPC and Department of Health and these letters that are flying around.
So, we've had some comments. So Steve Taylor, who is, I think we're going to be talking about in a little bit later anyway. So he mentions about the fact it's all professional from Wes, but he also identifies some of the comments we've had in some of the previous letters: laggards, refuse nicks, stuck in the 20th century. You know, Wes is not afraid of using some fairly terse language when he wants to. And it's interesting how he's trying to now roll it back a little bit as well, I think. So we shall see. Okay,
so that's probably the big story. But I guess the other big, more general thing that has happened this week has been the long-awaited budget 2025 from Rachel Reeves. So I guess we got an opportunity to kind of give our take in terms of how that affects general practice. So it might be worth just highlighting some other people who've probably done this a lot better than we might do, although we have unique opinions, and you guys out there might have opinions as well, which you can share with us in the comments section. NHS Confederation, as ever, are normally quite on top of the news cycle, and they've done an analysis of the budget, and that's inspired some of what we're talking about today. There are colleagues at Wimslow GP Health Centre. Now, they started doing some really good YouTube videos, so I encourage people to support them and subscribe. I think they've done a really good video. And then
so I know Amar and Fari pretty well. In fact, you never know, you may see them joining us soon. Fingers crossed. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. And definitely check out the one from Medics Money. So Ed and Tom, specifically it's Ed talking on this particular one. I've already had a listen to it. It's a great episode with Ed and Andy, a different Andy, not this Andy, talking about the budget. And yeah, this will give you everything you need to know when it comes to general practice. But we're going to talk about a couple of extra points they haven't quite covered in their session. So hang fire on that one.
Yeah, or provide emphasis, I guess. So we can probably lose Ed from the screen, I guess. That's better. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll give a few kind of reflection on the budget for myself and just kind of summarize really where I think it's impactful for general practice. I guess, first of all, just to talk about the context, right, longer waited, there was a really big build up to the budget, wasn't there? There was lots of leaks and like kite flying, as they say, where they kind of leak something, an idea, and see what sort of reaction it gets, and then can decide whether to include that in the final budget. So there was lots of will she, won't she sort of going on, I think. And of course, and on the day, there was the leak from the OBR as well, which obviously everybody's talking about. But I think someone in the OBR sent an email like 40 minutes too soon and leaked everything. Financial Times, I think, and that had an influence on gilt markets, and it's all a big palaver. So they'll be looking into that. So in terms of the NHS, so actually quite absent in terms of discussion within the budget speech and the post-budget analysis. I didn't pick up on any new specific announcements about NHS funding per se that we didn't know already or that were really mentioned at all within the budget. I think things remain as they were from the spending review and budget last year. Department of Health and Social Care budget continues to increase by 2.4% annually through the end of the Parliament in 29-30, which is known to be below historical increases. So the rate at which the health budget historically has increased since it was founded has been higher than that. So lower than historical rates, and inflation I think is currently still sort of 3.6, 3.8%. So looking at lower than inflationary increases in health spending. There's an announcement for 250 neighbourhood health centres that will be paid for via some new public-private partnership arrangements. And I think there's some discussion about how many of those are actually new and how many might actually kind of already be in existence but being repurposed or tarted up a little bit as well. I mean, we've had some experience with kind of public, I don't know if we're in a position to talk about it with, or I've certainly had experience with public finance initiative funded buildings, and actually the charges to the public services that end up sort of renting and needing to pay maintenance fees in those buildings can be pretty high. And many people would criticize that in the long run they might not represent good value for money for the taxpayer. What they do enable is for building work and things to be developed up front without needing to borrow or tax, or that funding appearing on the government balance sheet, which is really, really convenient, but it gets something built. But then the government pay for it in the long run in terms of having to rent that asset back and make good that money that has been invested by private investors. So anyways, that's interesting. And, we'll see how that is structured. There's a freeze on prescription charges. They remain at £9.90. So that's probably, a good thing for many of our patients. I think the thing that affects a lot of practices is changes to minimum wage. So that's something that we always have a look at in the budget. And there have been increases to kind of all the categories of minimum wage that are over and above that 2.4% general increase in funding into the health sector. So we've got like the national living wage, that's for people over 21, going up 4.4%, £12.71. 18 to 20 year olds going up by 8.5% to £10.85. 16 to 17 year olds up by 6% to £8 an hour, and similar rate for apprentices. They tend to be on that 16 to 17 year rate. So just pause there. Any reactions, Gandhi? How are you going to cope with the minimum wage increases?
I mean, that's one of the interesting ones. Is this time round, obviously, back in April, we had a double hit. It was the increase of national living wage, but you also had the national insurance increases in terms of the changes of the thresholds, and that had a significant impact on practice finances. So, we heard figures of, 30 to £100,000. Some practices were having to pay extra for their wage bills as a result of those changes. This year, it's not going to be probably as significant because we don't have that adjustment that we had with national insurance, but the increase does mean that practices are going to have to pay more for staffing, not just at the basic level, but the part that people forget about is if your minimum pay amount goes up, that means almost every differential will also have to increase to some degree. Otherwise, clearly, those staff who are paid slightly above minimum wage are going to think, hold on a second, I'm doing more complex work. Why am I taking home similar pay to someone who's doing a, potentially a different job? Now, let's be clear, working, reception, minimum wage is not easy work and stuff, and it is in fact probably harder than what other clinicians are having to do at times as well. But the fact of the matter is, general practice doesn't have the ability to do what almost every other business in the world has, which is they can't increase their prices, they can't go to another provider, they have to suck up the costs. And the question is, how do you suck up those costs? And actually, Andy from Medics Money talks about it really well in one of those podcasts. I can't remember which one, but basically there's only two ways of doing it. And that is either have more patients on your books, which then dilutes the care you potentially offer to the ones you've already got to some degree, or you find efficiency savings. And actually, as we mentioned earlier, general practice is already one of the most efficient parts of the healthcare system, because it's the only one that can't go into a deficit, because otherwise the practice closes.
So what Wes would say, I think, is productivity is the answer. Okay, and there is something in that.
Of productivity. So there is £300 million being put into NHS technology productivity. Emphasis on it. This is the NHS, not general practice. So there is some extra funding to enable that to happen, and that's pretty much what they're banking on, from what I can see from the budget. They're banking on that 300 million across the NHS, leading to productivity changes that help improve things.
Absolutely. Sure. So if you can't get more patients, and your other options, I guess, are to reduce your staffing, potentially reduce the amount of care that you're delivering, or you make it good with those productivity increases. So technology is one of the ways to improve productivity. I guess also people would say investing in human capital, training, getting your existing staff better skills so that they can do more. That's another way of increasing productivity. And also actually, not all productivity increases come from, I guess, digital technology. You might look at your kind of processes, and your operating models, and sometimes there's efficiencies that can be gotten there, and that's where people will say they predict that this whole thing will balance, because they're predicting productivity increases in the NHS, including general practice. But anyway, there we go. But it's going to be a challenge for practices.
Definitely.
Some other things that came out I thought were interesting that maybe affect the wider determinants of health were an extension of the sugar tax, so the tax on sugary drinks, to cover a few more categories like milkshakes, and I often buy those coffees in a packet from Lidl and other places, so they're going to be included in the sugar tax as well, so they'll be a little bit more expensive, and maybe I'll drink a bit less of them, and my health will improve. I mean, actually, that tax has been really influential in terms of reducing the amount of sugar in sugary drinks. So that's maybe not to be sniffed at, and that's not something that I would oppose. Removal of the two-child tax benefit limit is predicted to lift many children out of poverty. We work in deprived areas, so that's probably helpful for many of the children and families living in our areas. Probably pause there. Any other measures that kind of took your eye, Gandhi?
No, I mean, some of the remaining stuff was around a lot of the changes in terms of taxing rates. So things like savings, pensions, various other parts. A really interesting situation we're going to see potentially is because of the increase in pension payments. And if I'm right on this, we may actually have the first time where people taking the full state pension will have to start paying tax on it because of the fiscal drift of the first tax band. So it's a weird situation that's never happened before, if I'm right.
No, I think it's predicted to happen within this parliament. So not this year, but kind of in coming years, I think it's predicted to happen. I think it'll never happen, because they tend not to do things that disadvantage the pensioners too directly. So maybe that'll be the point at which the thresholds increase. But yes, that's called fiscal drag, isn't it? So as people's wages increase, more and more people are pulled into that lower tax band, paying like 12,400 or something. More people come into that, start paying tax, and more people move into the higher tax threshold as well. So the thresholds don't change. They don't change how many pennies in the pound you pay, but just more people, as they earn more, are paying more tax, and the government gets quite a lot of money from that, actually. And sort of criticised being a bit of a stealth tax, and that probably they have increased the tax burden on working people. They've just not increased the rate of tax. So that's quite interesting. The other thing was, so there's something around pension salary sacrifice and limiting that to 2,000. Now, my understanding is that the NHS pension is a defined benefit pension, and that this salary sacrifice issue doesn't affect people within the NHS pension. But if people have a private pension, or they're topping up some of their income into an additional private pension, then they would need to kind of look at this, and this will affect them, but not people taking or paying into the standard NHS pension. And then the other thought that I'd sort of had was really actually in terms of government borrowing rates, the budget seems to have been received fairly well. I think those are going down, not up at the moment. Chancellor's giving herself a bit more headroom. I'm doing the air commas, 22 billion rather than 10 billion that she had before. So maybe that'll reassure the markets. Actually, if it's a kind of better borrowing environment for the government, then maybe that's good for government services in terms of if things go well, there might be more money for spending or tax reductions in the future. But that's a more general point, I guess. So there we go.
So we talked about, well, we talked about a variety of things there, didn't we, Andy? The impact of the budget, the various aspects. Important to remember that in terms of specific stuff, this isn't where we learn about the funding for the NHS. That's already been predetermined in the previous spending reviews, and more of that will come through when we hit the GP contract reviews, which are again pending and stuff. So it's less relevant, I think, to those around general practice specifically, apart from some of those things like the living wage increase and that kind of stuff. But the neighbourhood side of things is going to be interesting in terms of what that looks like. I mean, 250 neighbourhood health centres sounds like an amazing amount, but remembering that still works out about 250,000 patients per neighbourhood centre, and realistically they're only going to service the 1,000 or 2,000 patients that live around it, generally speaking, more effectively. So they're probably not going to have a significant effect on the population health as the government's hoping. That amazing information about 250 health centres sounds like. But it's a step in a direction. Whether it's the right direction, I guess, is a separate part.
Yeah, I mean, could have been worse, was my kind of attitude to the budget this time. That was kind of my reaction, really.
And the interesting thing is the thing that was missing, which was this fabled aspect of partnerships having to pay the national insurance. Do you remember we covered that on a previous story? How initially it was thought about partnerships, but then it seemed to be narrowed down to limited liability partnerships, which is not what general practice is based on. But even that did not come into fruition from the budget.
No, there was lots of things, lots of kites flowing, but not many of those things made it into the final budget. So we've got some comments. I think.
Yeah. So more comments from Steve Taylor. So he's mentioning that. So it's a bit of a split comment. So let's bring it on. So Wes needs to fund more GPs.
Okay, just emphasising that.
Yeah. And definitely this one about the fact that 39 million appointments last month in general practice is a new record productivity madness. I agree with Steve on this one. I don't see why everyone's looking at general practice to find the productivity gains. We are already the most productive part of the healthcare system as it is. There are absolutely other places to look if you want productivity gains, in my view.
So, next story.
Next story. So we've had Steve commenting. That's probably because he's been instrumental in this next document that we're going to be talking about. So your GP is here for you. So this is from the DAUK, the Doctors Association UK, and they've kind of published their own kind of manifesto. And hopefully Andy's going to bring it up in a second.
Yeah, so I've got the Pulse story as ever with us. A lot of these things start with Pulse, and then we dig a little bit deeper. So Doctors Association UK demanded the government increase core funding per patient by 40% as part of its new patient-centered GP contract. So they're kind of positioning and making suggestions for the contents of the GP contract. They've got a new campaign called Your GP is Here for You, or Your GP Here for You, that's proposing that the funding is increased by £40 to £209 per year. They're saying that will sort of give pay restoration for where we would be if funding had increased in line with inflation over the last few decades. And then they've got a 10-point kind of plan for that, which I think is really, really good. It's quite easy to engage with these 10-point plans, and I think it sets out some good kind of themes, and it's kind of refreshing to feel the debate move away from 1st of October access changes and into some of those other themes, actually. So I sort of quite welcome this as a bit of a breath of fresh air coming through.
Just to mention that is Steve in that picture there that you can see. So he's joining us live on the account comments and stuff. And he's mentioned that he wanted to start a discussion and be more positive. I've no idea Wes was going to do what he did a day later. So yeah.
Are they talking to you, Steve? Just let us know. Has Wes been courting Doctors Association UK for input? Let us know. And the other thing, I was asking Gandhi, Steve, I know you're watching now, so you'll be able to respond. And I was just asking Gandhi, sort of, where is the Doctors Association UK like positioned in terms of its kind of perspective on general practice? Because I guess we might have kind of local LMCs, sort of BMAs, who are quite a firm position on contract and work pushback. There used to be this old image of cardigan GPs, at the RCGP, who are like, we're all about the patient, we'll suck it up and work harder than is good for us kind of position. And maybe there are more spectrums in terms of where GPs sit, not just that kind of linear spectrum. But whereabouts is Doctor Association UK kind of positioned, or maybe the positioning is something completely different? Be great to know if you're able to kind of type in the comments. Gandhi, you might have a position, but Steve's probably the arbiter of these things.
I think I'll let Steve come in when he's able to. I think he has mentioned no, not at all, and I think that was in response to your question about has Wes had a discussion with DAUK, so I don't think that's the case. Probably worth going through the plan, if that's all right, Andy. So there are 10 points around it. So the first one is headlined as "Be there where you need," and this is talking about general practitioners being available, being around, and very much the focus should be on increasing the number of GPs employed to work within the NHS rather than not providing the resources to enable that to happen. The second one is focusing on a key thing we've talked about repeatedly, which is improving and providing continuity. So aiming to see the same clinician and preferably the GP in terms of that, and looking at particularly a reduction in list size allocated to individual GPs, currently sitting about 2,500 patients per full-time equivalent GP, bring it down to European levels, which would see us about 1,850 patients per registered GP, which is a significant change if that was to happen. I don't know about you, but I know that my numbers are higher than 2,500, and I know some parts of the country where it hits clear over 3,000 patients per registered GP. That's the situation we're currently living within.
Yeah, same here. And there is huge variation as well, with some areas, being closer to that 1850 mark as well. I guess just pausing and saying what I find actually quite refreshing about these calls is that they're quite they're kind of looking at things that patients value, continuity, GP being there for me, and then translating those into kind of policy positions and negotiating positions to kind of start talking with the government about. I think it's quite refreshing positioning to see, really, and to kind of broaden the debate out to these other areas. Shall we move on to the next point? So 3, preventing illness will be a priority. So in this point, they really argue that there's been a shift kind of too far, and I think we've spoke about this quite a lot, Gandhi, too far in the direction of access, like really kind of access when patients want it at quite short notice, without an emphasis on who they see. They might see different GPs, might see different members of the team, and they're arguing for a shift back more to actually, if you really want to prevent illness, then actually continuity is really, really important. Relationship-based care is really, really important, and that we should value that more compared to access. Access is important, but actually we should value those things more as well, essentially.
Especially with the fact that the evidence shows that continuity with a clinician like your GP is one of the best ways to improve both life expectancy and life quality as well. So key aspects in that area. Next, it talks about remaining in your local community, and I think this is probably taking a look at some of the aspects of making sure that clinicians are there to see you in your local community rather than focusing on big fancy neighborhood health centers potentially. A little bit of context, I think, in there from today's episode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Point 5, promoting and support GP teams in areas of most need and new communities as they are built. So there's a call really here for to look at fairer funding. We know that the Cahill formula is being looked at, and there's a process to review that, but they're arguing to really focus on making funding fairer for communities that is kind of difficult to doctor, I guess, underprivileged areas, and those communities that are being built where often there isn't a health centre there, and often there isn't adequate provision made for health services in those areas. Steve, I've just clocked rural, big issue as well. I guess we're in a city GP, so we don't really live that, but there are big challenges rurally as well that need to be included in the weighting as well as in the city deprivation. So it's really arguing, I think, for investment in those areas of highest need, which you can't argue with, I think. Do you want to do 6, Gandhi?
Yeah, so working within a multidisciplinary team, providing holistic care and building on existing community teams. So this is recognising the fact that, the GP is not the only voice that you need to be looking at when it comes to primary care, but also it's working collaboratively with those different voices in terms of their skills and how that works, and working collaboratively rather than potentially some areas of the country where we've seen dumping in both directions.
Yeah, so the next point is interesting, actually. So general practice 2, provide the interface between other services, interpreting results, providing support and ongoing care. So they're really arguing for the GP and the GP practice to remain that front door to the NHS, that central point of access to NHS services, and interpreting results, coordinating and managing care, making the argument that actually things feel quite fragmented, can be difficult for patients to know where they should be turning. If they have health needs, do they go to the walk-in centre, ED, call 111? Do they still go to the general practice? So really advocating for that role for general practice to be kind of the central kind of health hub and point of contact within their communities.
Yeah, definitely agree on that. And then
with extra funding, that might be possible, with that £40.
Yes.
Sorry, carry on.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a massive differential there. 40 quid extra per registered patient. You're talking nearly a 30% increase, I believe, almost in terms of funding. Imagine, so it points maybe to Labour, if we had kept in line with inflation, you would have 30% more resource in general practice. That means you potentially have 30% more capacity. So the current challenges patients face in terms of not being able to access clinicians, their GPs, etc., is because we've had comparatively, in terms of inflation and various other things, a 30% reduction of resources, and being asked to still provide the capacity that the population wants/needs as a result of that. That's why you struggle to see a GP. Anyway, moving on. Adding into that, I guess, is the tick box culture that we have seen prevalent across the NHS, and absolutely agree with anything that helps to reduce that. We've heard about that in the red tape challenge as well by Wes himself, that he wants to reduce bureaucracy, and the DAUK have actually asked for this in their point, and basically gone quite bold in saying abolishing QOF and the IIF and bringing forth a different mechanism of bringing those annual reviews to patients, focus it around their birthday month, and have a health review that looks at wellness and general health care rather than being focused on tick boxes that we currently see, which are driven by QOF, which I think potentially was in the works. If you remember, if you go back, we had consultations on QOF and whether it was an appropriate mechanism or vehicle to be managing chronic disease and healthcare by our previous government, and they were looking at whether that would continue or be scrapped. What do you think, Andy?
Interesting. I'm a little bit more on the fence on this one. I think there are some elements of QOF that I would get rid of and repurpose. But I guess there is something in the fact that commissioners, I guess, kind of want and need, and maybe even patients need to be assured that they'll get kind of similar care, a similar package of care from one GP practice to another, and that they'll have a similar experience of the application of guidelines and thresholds for treatment and so forth. So a certain amount of well targeted QOF, I don't necessarily think would always be a bad thing. But then I guess they're not making that point either, because I'm sure there'll be some guidance around the birthday month review that they suggest, although it might be that some things need doing more often, than annually. So I wonder if that needs a little bit more work, but I agree with the sentiment. So let's go to number 9. So advocate for patients in government decisions and the national health policies. So this is where I was thinking, I wonder, has Wes Streeting been talking to the National Association, the Doctors Association UK, because it's a bit like the content of Wes's letter. Argument made is that actually GP practices are really close to patient populations and have a lot of contact with them, a lot of insights into different communities, different types of patients. And actually, I've often kind of thought this is a reason to try and keep many decisions about, I guess, development, commissioning of services, quite close to populations, and that GPs can have good insights into those decisions, and it's helpful to include them. So I really agree with point 9.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, it just talks about remaining hopeful. So it's remembering the fact that general practice does see half the population a month in their consultations, and that actually it is the jewel in the crown of the NHS. So maintaining it and remaining hopeful about the fact that it is something to value and to keep, and effectively focusing on that as the hope of the future of healthcare.
So, so really interested to know if people have any comments about that. I know Steve's, I think, been reacting to some of the things that we've been saying as we've gone through. So thanks for that, Steve. And we might take a look at some of those. What have we had?
So he mentions about replacing QOF with a single annual review, one tick box around the evidence, but an agreed plan with a GP for a coming year, keeping it simple. I think there's definitely something about keeping stuff simple. I also get Andy's point that, some of the information, that the value of the general practice database is the quality of the information, and the coding of that absolutely plays a part. The flip side of that, I think I'd also mention, is the fact that, sometimes one of the frustrations is that practices are penalized potentially for using the wrong codes because they were asked to code things one way, and then that's changed mid-year. And is that a deliberate exercise to try and reduce the amount of payments, or is it just an incompetence in terms of the way that they run things in this outset, to try and capture data? But it still all leads to the same thing. It's about the data, it's about the quality of care and the standardization you potentially see by providing that. That's what the hope is. Does it work? Probably not. Not as well as it could do.
Just noticing, I think this comment was Steve responding to my exploration of kind of the sort of positioning of the organization. So he said sort of volunteer and advocacy organization, so have all of those types of GPs. So I guess they're seeking to represent a broad church of GPs, and just confirming, represent doctors generally. So, and I think it's not just GPs actually, is it? This is a general doctors group with different divisions within it. Gives us a bit more information. So this guidance was based around the Health and Social Care Committee report in 2022. I think that's the report that we welcomed, didn't we? Jeremy Hunt sort of went up in our expectations, being the chair of that committee, and that was a really, really interesting report. There's probably an episode of us talking about it out there. But he kind of won some brownie points back for that report. Lots of evidence taken, but was released the day Liz Truss resigned. Okay. The data very bad news, probably.
Actually. But we've had an interesting comment from Anne-Marie Cunningham, so fellow clinician who does some amazing stuff. So do we know the number of encounters per month is the same number as half the population, or has it been shown in England that on average half the population has at least one encounter? So I guess to explain this a bit more detail, so this is the fact that, for example, per month, general practice sees 30+ million patients per month. And then obviously noting the fact the population of England, I think, is 69 million, I want to say, something like that.
Maybe not quite that. That might be UK population.
Might be UK.
But nonetheless.
But effectively, it's using that data. So no, let's be clear. This is not saying that literally half of the population have an appointment with their GP every single month, because we know that to be the case. Not to be the case. I mean, touch wood, I've not had to see my GP, I don't think, this year. So but it is just talking in terms of full numbers. The volume of care being offered by general practice is absolutely considerably higher than every other part of the healthcare system. Steve coming in with some data about the average number of consults is 7. 20% don't consult in any one year. but 7 consultations per year, noting the fact that a lot of the modelling for general practice funding is based on the fact that most patients consult only 3 or 4 times a year. So yeah, there's definitely
I remember when that was
data.
5. I'm sure we used to say 5 a few years ago. Thanks for the up-to-date statistics, Steve. Yeah. So that felt like we ended in a more positive place than we could have done. There's something uplifting about taking the debate to that more kind of aspirational space. So that was welcome.
Definitely. So EGP learners, you're probably wondering what's happening next in EGP learning. Couple of things just to update you on. So number one, PCN Plus is still up and ready to book in for. I know we haven't talked about it much, but we've had some other things happen with the group that's just basically slowed us down a little bit. But absolutely, if you want to come and join us in April in Nottingham at the amazing Castle Meadow Conference Centre, then we'll be there talking about everything that's happening for 2026 in general practice with myself, Andy, Ben Gallen and Tara Humphreys, and we'll be covering loads of stuff there for you. So if you do want to register, do feel free to do so. There's still some tickets left. If you're quick, and you may get access to join us still in the early bird. I think that finishes soon, in which case the costs do go up after that. Also remembering that we are going to be launching our GP5T11 shortly. In fact, Andy doesn't know this, but I've been working on this beforehand. So there is as I'm calling it, a Black Cyber Day sale for the GP5T tickets, which go live tomorrow. So you will have access to that.
Oh, you heard it here first. So
yeah, there you go. So particularly for those who have attended some of our previous conferences, you'll get access to those. If not, then be quick, because those tickets are going to go on sale, etc. Interestingly, I've got some really cool stuff coming up on the channel in the next few weeks. So loads of content. I've had a weird creative flurry, shall we say, in terms of content to help practices, to cover the conference scene. And also in December, hearing it first, one of the most requested things I've been having for the past few weeks is a comparison of the AVT Scribe toolkit. So me and Andy have just filmed part of that before we went live today. One of the things that's going to help show you the differences between the AVTs that's available. And you're going to see the providers put through their steps in full detail. That's going to be Wednesday, the 17th of December. So you've got about 3 weeks to get ready for it. And that is going to be an absolutely amazing comparison webinar, I hope. Unfortunately, Andy can't join us live because he's in another meeting, but he will be joining us in spirit, won't you, Andy?
I'm joining you in spirit, and I'm also starring in the test consultation as Dr. Foster. So
yeah. So if you want to watch any of that content, as well as some extra stuff that I've got coming through as well to help those of you who are concerned about the whole HCA vaccination consent stuff, sneak peek coming up soon, then absolutely make sure you subscribe to our content down below. Give us a like if you found this episode useful. We always love to know if you guys have found this content effective and helpful. We forgot to do our wavelength today. Maybe we'll bring that back next time. We'll see. And as ever, we'll catch you as we continue to take enhance your primary care and learning. We'll see you.